Hi, my name's Steve and welcome to the Seaside Allotment channel, and today I promised to talk about self-sufficiency and our approach to it and how well we're doing and what's working and what's not. So it's a complicated topic really, because obviously self-sufficiency is totally impractical as far as my lifestyle is concerned. So it's a bit of a game really that we're playing just to make allotmenting a little bit more fun and a little bit more challenging. And so we try to be pretty much self-sufficient in vegetables and seasonal fruit. And there's two kind of fundamental approaches that you could take to that. One is grow everything in its optimum season and freeze and dry as much as possible, or extend the season and grow and eat almost everything fresh. And that's what we do, because just the quality of the food is just so much better from my perspective when you eat it fresh. The nutritional density is better, and of course we do like fresh food. Some stuff just doesn't freeze or dry, so the salads, the leafy greens, all that sort of thing. And the other approach really is to kind of earn enough from what you're growing that you can buy the stuff that you can't grow yourself. And so all those three approaches are very valid, but let's sort of just drill into my approach a little bit. So my approach is to grow as much as possible, and in choosing what to grow, I grow the stuff that's most expensive in the shops and the stuff that's most nutritionally dense. And there's two reasons that I really try and do that. One is that when you grow as much as you can, then you always have a surplus, which means that we always have enough to eat, and we give the surplus away to our friends and family, and so that means we get a lot of goodwill. It's really pleasurable to do. And we often barter stuff in return, so that kind of increases our ability to be self-sufficient. So for example, in winter we might get grapes and tomatoes and cucumbers and things like that, which people have bought in the shops, and they give us those in barter, or we get backyard eggs, that sort of thing. So that's the approach that we take. Now there are some issues with that and some challenges. So the first one is you've got to be really organised related to successional planning. And in the second part of this video, I'm going to talk and show you, our attempts this year at good successional planning. I did it really badly last year, but this year I've put more focus on it, and I've definitely improved, and I'll show you that. So the second thing is, when you're eating pretty much a huge proportion of your nutrients from the same 1,000 square meters worth of land on sandy soil, that's a huge concern, and there's a big chance that you're going to get nutritional deficiencies. So we put a lot of effort into the health of the soil. And so what does that mean? It means a thick compost mulch on all of the beds, means making my own compost and making that as nutrient rich as possible, and it means some amendments. And the amendments that we use are seaweed off the beach or seaweed meal that we buy, rock dust, volcanic rock dust, and lots of leaves. And so those are lots of different sources of nutrients from different places. The rock dust is really high in minerals, the seaweed as well, with different set of minerals from the sea, obviously, and the leaves, minerals from deep down, drawn from deep down by the trees, and horse manure. The horses are eating food from a wider area than we're growing it, and so that's quite and calcified seaweed as well. So that's quite a range of amendments, and when you add up the compost and all of those amendments and the seeds and all of that sort of thing, that works out at something like, I think it's about 7% of the value of the crops that we harvest. So our profit margin, so to speak, is about 93%. So, but obviously we don't sell it, but we just kind of keep an eye really on the finances just to make sure that what we're doing makes sense. Now so successional planning is absolutely key. And that means we tend to start stuff at home in the conservatory and on the kitchen windowsill. Sometimes we bring it on under grow lights in the garage, although to be honest, that's not proved to be as successful as I would have liked it to have been. Then we've got various types of cover that we use. So the best that we've got is the polytunnel where I'm sitting now, but we only got that in April, and so we've not really been able to use it for the early season. So we've only really done it for spring, and therefore you'll see when we have a quick look round the successional planting in the polytunnel, we're a little bit behind where we could be. We then have the next best is the hoop tunnels, and they're really good actually, and not as good as a polytunnel, but they're much cheaper. And then we've got coal frames, and then we've got fleece, and then we've got sort of areas of the garden at home that are actually quite warm. It's a walled garden. There's a nice south-facing wall, captures quite a lot of heat. So there's a bit of a microclimate there, and then there's the allotment, the open beds on the allotment, which are much colder. In fact, we were only about 5 to 6 minutes walk away from the allotment, but it's much warmer in the back garden than it is here. Many a morning, there'd be only a very light frost at home, but quite a heavy frost at the allotment. So, and then there's storage. Now, last year we used some of the profits from the allotment, and we bought ourselves a second fridge and a second freezer, and we pretty much just use that for allotment produce. And that's been an absolute boon, especially actually having the second fridge, because it means you don't have to harvest every day. Effectively, it's like having our own little cool room, which a lot of professional growers obviously have. And also in the garage, we've got a back wall of it which is pretty much dedicated to storage of roots, and apples and pears and that sort of thing. And that has been really good. Our potatoes and stuff. Yeah, that's been fantastic. We right now we still have onions, just a few, maybe a couple of weeks of onions, and we still have potatoes, again maybe just a week or so worth of potatoes, and we still have beetroot. We've probably got 2 or 3 weeks worth of beetroot, so it's proved fantastic. We ran out of apples in about February, but it's worked really well. So storage is very useful, and obviously we've got the freezer as well, and mostly that's used for berries and beans, and we've got a bit of applesauce and some other bits and pieces in there, and we actually also store butter. So we buy butter in sort of September, October time, when the cows have been fed on pasture all the way through the summer. So the butter is really healthy, full of monosaturated and omega-3 oils, as well as saturated fat. So it's much healthier than it is in winter. And so we freeze that, and we use that. We don't use a lot of butter, but when we're making granolas and things like that, we use that butter instead. So I'm going to stop chattering now, and going to just show you some of the successions that we've got going. So we're in the polytunnel, and we should bear in mind that this polytunnel started really late because we only got it up in March, and I think we really started planting it in April, which is really late for a polytunnel. So obviously we could have done a lot with it had we had it over winter. and we will do a lot with it. So let's just have a quick look at what we've got. So we've definitely got some really nice courgettes. In fact, we've been picking courgettes all this week, and they're coming on really nicely. This is the earliest courgette plant that we've got. We've got another one at the other end of the polytunnel, and of course we've just planted our courgettes out in the ground. We've got Celery. This is the second Celery head. We picked the first Celery head a few days ago, and they're coming on thick and fast. And actually we've got another Celery out here, just outside, and that's coming on really nicely as well. So the things are better in the polytunnel, I think, on balance than they are outside, but it just shows you that in that kind of sheltered spot outside, Celery is doing really nicely. So then we've got our early brassicas, and these were planted in the early spring, and these have just allowed us to keep a really plentiful supply of brassica leaves as they finished in kind of March, April time. We had these in April and May, and as we're just moving into June, we've got loads of brassicas now outside. So effectively there's no reason to have brassicas in here, and so I'll be clearing this bed pretty quickly. I'll just leave the Celery in here. So then we've got carrots. Now we've got carrots outside in one of the coal frames, and they are further on than these carrots. Bearing in mind we've actually still got carrots in the ground from last year, which is still great, really succulent and sweet. But we've probably got maybe 2 or 3 weeks worth of carrots outside, and then we've already got carrots in the coal frame which are ready to eat now, and we picked our first ones this week, and then these carrots are the next batch, and really these are just in here just as an experiment to see how well carrots grow, and I would say they're growing really nicely. So then we come on to beetroot. Now, as I said, we've got beetroot in store. These beetroot could have been much further on had I planted them in the polytunnel earlier on in the year. So if I'd planted these at the beginning of March, then they'd been much better than this. But we have got loads of lovely baby beetroot in here now, and we picked our first, I think probably we've got about 6 or 7 baby beetroot that we've already picked this year so far from this bed, and as you can see, you know, they are actually really gorgeous. So there we go. Now we also want early leeks, and so these are some of our early leeks, and again this is a bit of an experiment, but effectively I can take these leeks out now and I'll plant them. Now they are outside, now they are multi-sown, because in order to get leeks as early as possible in the season, it just makes sense to harvest them as baby leeks, and so we probably have baby leeks in June or early July. And then this is the next courgette plant, and you can see there's not plenty of courgettes on there now as well, so we are pretty flush with courgettes. Okay, so what's next? So we've got beans, peas, and obviously we've got, you know, quite a few March 2 peas here now, and these are ready for eating. But again, these could have been planted much earlier, and so we could have had March 2 much earlier in the season. We only really eat fresh peas, we don't bother freezing them. And then we've got our corn, a sweet corn, and this is the earliest sweet corn we've got, and it's probably not viable to get it much earlier than this, but it's in a nice big pot and it's doing splendidly. And then we've got our next succession of sweet corn here, and then the rest of it is out in the ground. So let's take a look at our celery. So I'm absolutely thrilled with this celery. This was planted out in April probably, and it is ready, and we have been harvesting this celery as a cut and come again crop for the last week and a bit, and basically we're just pulling the stalks off the side and letting it replenish from the centre. And so I'm hoping that just this celery bed will keep us in celery for salads, and bear in mind we harvest for 20 people, so yeah, we get through. We'll be adding lots of celery to our salad mixes. And then we've got our strawberries. Now I'm doing a lot of work with strawberries next year, but I'm pretty pleased that we've got some strawberries in here that are nice, and we'll be ready to pick probably tomorrow. But really this is not the way to do strawberries in the bed. The way to do it is in pots, and so that's what I'm doing. I've got loads of pots now, all planted up with a succession of strawberries, really early ones, really late ones, and I'll be leaving them outdoors until about the end of February, and then I'll be bringing them in, and they'll run in pots, basically down here, so on the side of the bed where the chair is. And I've got four big pots of early and late strawberries, so they'll just swap over. So yeah, I'm really excited about strawberries. So then we've got our tomatoes. Now pretty much everybody who's watching this probably knows more about growing tomatoes than I do, but basically I've got my cherry tomatoes, and I got my first tomato there, I think. So I've got the little cherries here, like tumbling ones, again, which I could do much earlier than this, but you know, just the practicalities of when I could get things started. But next year I'll have cherry tomatoes much earlier and much later. So I'm growing some cherry varieties which I will put in the conservatory for really late season cherries, because that's completely frost free. In here I'll have the tumbling tom type cherries, which will give me a really early season, and then I've got my cordons down there. So I'm hoping to have tomatoes for a very long season, even hoping to have them for Christmas. And then I got peppers, and loads of peppers, which I'm also hoping to have for a very long season. I know even less about growing peppers than I know about growing tomatoes. So what else have we got? So basically nothing else that's worthy of mention from a early late crop sort of perspective. I've got some squash here, trumbuccinos I think they're called. Got cucumbers in the corners and cucumbers in the centre, but again these were started really late just because I didn't have any options. And so I think that is enough about the polytunnel, so let's go look outside. So I am a massive fan of spring onions, and in fact they're my most popular harvest with friends and family as well. And this spring onion bed was planted in January, and it's in a cold frame. It's done pretty well, but this was planted from seed in January, whereas this bed was planted with plugs, which were germinated indoors in January, so at basically the same time, and that has been fully harvested now because it was much further on. So planting in plugs, bringing them on, and then planting them in the cold frame is definitely the way to go. Now what I am hoping to do is have spring onions really well on in September time, and keeping them standing over winter, so that we've got spring onions pretty much all year round. So this is the cold frame where I did the early carrots. It's carrot fly season, so they're under fleece, but these carrots are ready to harvest now, and again they were planted in January. So lettuces, anybody who watches my video knows I do a lot of lettuces, and these are lettuces that were planted in January. and they have been absolutely amazing and still amazing now. And of course we also overwinter lettuces, although I've got no lettuces I don't think left now that were overwintered. So these are this year's onions. So these were planted from seed, and they were planted out I think in March, and there's a mix of red and yellow onions. And what I really like about this planting technique is that these are multi-sowed indoors, and these can just be eaten as spring onions because they're the same variety, stir on, or they can be left to mature into full-size bulbs. So I am aiming for 3 onions in each clump to mature, although I will trim, take maybe some down to 2 and some down to 1 to get a mix of sizes. But as you can see, they're just looking really gorgeous and healthy. So this is my early outdoor brassica bed, and so here you can see that there's not a lot of point growing in the polytunnel at the time when I planted, because this outdoor bed, brought on nice and early under fleece, is just as mature, and these are just temporary in here until the main brassica beds take over. But just look at that kale. See, kale Nero, absolutely gorgeous for this time of year. So pleased with that. And here you can see that we've got much less mature calabrese, so it's definitely worth bringing the calabrese on in the polytunnel, but not so much just the general brassicas. So these are some of my outside peas. So you saw that peas are ready inside. These are alderman, which are flowering now. So these peas should be ready by the time the ones in the polytunnel are finished, and then these peas take over. So these are just planted at the back of my cold frame, and they just found their own way up to this climbing frame at the back. And so these peas should be ready when the alderman, well, they'll probably overlap a little bit with the alderman, but when the alderman are starting to finish. And then these aldermen here should take over. So let's have a quick look at the runner beans. So these are the outdoor runner beans, and it's not really practical to get them much bigger than this here, because we do get some frosts, and obviously the frosts just take those out, and therefore got to find a way to get runner beans a little bit earlier in the season. So this is what I've tried. So I don't know whether you can see my little runner bean teepee here, but I started this one in the polytunnel, and as you can see, it's right up at the top now and ready to be pinched out, and I've got plenty of flowers, and it's quite happy outside now. So this has worked really nicely. So I'm a really big fan so far of starting things out in these big tubs in the polytunnel, and then bringing them outside as soon as they can cope. So it's probably just worth very quickly talking about lettuces, because I'm kind of mad on lettuces. But this is a second sowing of lettuces. So this bed has already had overwintered lettuces in it. They're all out now, and then new lettuces are in, and these are ready for harvest now. We harvest the outer leaves and they just keep on coming, and these are interplanted with leeks, and again these will just be pulled as baby leeks. And then I've got my golden beetroot here, and these have to be planted later than the red bold hardy beetroot because they do run to seed if you plant them too early. But now let's look at some of the summer crops. So we're getting to the time now where spinach bolts, and so we're transitioning over to New Zealand spinach. And this New Zealand spinach was planted at the same time as my early crop, but this was just outside with no cover or protection from the wind. And this bed was planted on the same day, but with just this little bit of protection. This cover's been open apart from at night, but just closing it at night, you can see that these are maybe 2 weeks further on, and these are interplanted with spring onions. So I think that gives you a pretty good idea. Let's just show you January planted lettuces. So these lettuces were planted in January, and these are all ready to come out now, so they're a bit past their best. But I'm not replanting these because this is the bed that the sweet potatoes are going in, so these are just being harvested as heads as and when. And then I've got some more successions of carrots. So I've got carrots in here which are coming on really nicely, and I've also got carrots over there and brassicas. So you can see that these were just planted at the optimum time for brassicas, which I think is kind of April time, and they're doing beautifully. And so we're ready to these are ready to take over now from the early planted stuff, and yeah, really lovely selection in there. Now, I have got better brassicas than these, but those are on Jennie's plot. So it is now worth just showing you my next succession of carrots, and there they are. And these are multi-sown radish, and they're just being popped in 4 radish or 5 radish in each clump. And I did see a video where somebody said, oh, you have to plant, in order to get radish to full size, you have to plant them something like 4 inches apart. Well, these are not 4 inches apart. Lovely. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about potatoes. Everybody loves their potatoes, and we have done a reasonable job of early potatoes this year. What we did was we started them in the conservatory, and we chose Charlotte. I always find Charlotte does the best for me early. Anyway, planted them in the conservatory under the desk, just tucked out of the way. Germinate, they start growing nicely, and they're out the tops of the pots. They're fully earthed up by about, I planted them in February, beginning of February, 3rd of February I think, by early March, and by that time I moved them outside, and I've just left them outside, and we harvested last week, and they're only small but really tasty. And then the next succession we put on in this shed on the bench there, and they got good protection from the frost there. And as you can see, these are pretty close to being ready to harvest. So That's really good. And then we've got successions basically of potatoes all the way down there in those tubs, and then we've got potatoes all the way down there in the beds. So let's talk a little bit about onions. So we've got a few onions in store still, but we've now got onions ready for harvest in this bed, and red onions as well in this bed. So they're still a little bit small, but they're certainly plenty big enough for eating. And as by the time we've harvested all of those, then the main crop onions will be ready. So that's pretty good. And we've got the same kind of succession going on here with the garlic. We've got some that should be ready in June, and then we go on all the way through to August, and then of course we're storing it all the way through the year until now again. So these are main crop onions in here, and yeah, these are all coming on really nicely, and there's loads of schlots in here. This is going to be one heck of a tangled mess of onions pretty soon. And then of course we've got our main brassica bed here, and yeah, plenty of leaves. You don't want to harvest these too heavily at this stage, but you can definitely take a leaf off each plant each week, and so there's plenty of brassicas here. And then when all of these garlic and onions are out, then we'll switch over to those. And that brings us finally to the broad beans. So you can see that these are maybe a week away from beginning our harvest, and these were overwintered. And then we've got on the plot the ones that we planted in the spring, and they'll be ready for harvest maybe a month or so later than these. And then we kind of freeze some of these broad beans. We don't continue with them much beyond early summer. So we just planted the squashes, and then we've got our successions of sweet corn interplanted. These will be hand pollinated because they're quite a long way apart. And then we've got one more succession of sweet corn which we'll be planting out in about maybe 3 weeks or something like that. And of course these squashes will also be stored over winter. There's courgettes right at the far end, and then there's curry, and then there's butternut squashes, and then there's crown prince, and some more beans. And so just for completeness, we'll probably just quickly talk about broccoli. So this is claret, and this is pretty much finished now, but this has provided amazing broccoli in April and May, so we've been fantastically pleased with this, really great. And then before that we had Rudolph, which was also pretty good, but that went all the way through really from October, November time to pretty much when the claret took over. And we've also got summer purple, which actually got our first head of summer purple in the polytunnel at the moment. And then of course we've got the Celebrys, and so you can pretty much get a full year round of the broccolis. You know, I talked about the spinach going to seed and why we switch over to New Zealand spinach. So this bed was only planted a few weeks ago, and this red kitten, look, already going to seed. It's mad how quickly it runs to seed. You know, literally you only get a few weeks of harvest off it before it runs. This one, which I think is Amazon, is a little bit better, provided you keep picking it aggressively. And this was picked 2 days ago, I think, and already it needs picking again. So yeah, that's why we move over to New Zealand spinach, which doesn't bolt, and is just as prolific as ordinary true spinach. And you can also get, which we really like, chard and a bit of perpetual spinach as well, to get spinach all through the year. And of course you can do the same thing with berries, but I think I'll leave the berries for another video. So there we go, see you soon. And I should also mention, probably most important succession of all, composting. So let's have a quick look at that. So this is the one of the raw ingredients. So this is just horse manure, and it's lovely and warm. I'm just turning it into this bin, and as I'm doing it I'm mixing in some perpetual spinach, which I've just cleared. And then in this next bed here, this is that same horse manure. A month or so later on, as you can see, this is looking pretty good. And then this is horse manure mixed with wood chips. And this is from December, and you can see there's still some big chunks of wood in there, but I'm really pleased with the way that is composting down. And then I take that and pop it in the dialect, and this was actually topped up with some raw manure, but this is kind of what it looks like in here. So this is about 6 months on, and then it goes into the bottom of all of my buckets, tubs, whatever you want to call them, and so it sits in there for another 6 months, and it's also in the bottom of all of these. So the bottom 2/3 of all of my containers, so the potato tubs, the tomatoes, the peppers, the beans, the corn, etc. And then all of that will eventually get turned out onto the beds, so the potato beds and the brassica beds and the like, and that'll be about another 6 months. So the compost is by then at least 12 months old, not 18 months old. So kind of that's the succession of the compost. So there you go. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, it would be fantastic if you commented and liked, because I just love reading the comments, and because I'm such a newbie gardener, still in my second year, second year growing this way, third year just as a standard allotment. It's lovely to get comments and feedback and hints and tips and advice and all that sort of thing, because the more you know, the more you realise you need to know. And likes and shares and all that sort of thing just mean that more people get to see these videos, and that would be nice as well. Anyway, see you soon.